Ladies and gentlemen, what transpired in that courtroom will be remembered as one of Sister Wives history's most shocking moments. For years, Robyn Brown, the so-called favorite wife, basked in power, privilege, and monetary security on Kody's arm. But in one solitary decision, it all came crumbling down. The judge's gavel struck the bench, and with those words, Robyn's empire started to topple. She didn't lose money. She didn't lose property, she lost control, influence, and the very foundation she had believed held her future secure. Inside that courtroom, the truth was revealed, and the truth was not on her side. As the papers were read aloud, Robyn's poise crumbled, the sobs, the tears, the uncontrollable crying. This wasn't the tough, unbreakable Robyn that fans were accustomed to viewing. This was a woman removed from her cocoon, given a reality that she could have never envisioned. Today we go in depth into the courtroom showdown that shook things up, how the hidden will was uncovered, how Kody's dynasty fell apart, and why Robyn's meltdown marked the largest change in Sister Wives history. This isn't simply another family feud. This is the story of betrayal, greed, shattered trust, and the emotional collapse of the one wife who thought she would never lose. The air inside the courtroom was heavy. The kind of heaviness that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel louder than it should. The tension was thick, and everyone could sense that what was about to unfold wasn't just another routine hearing. This was the moment that would change the Brown family forever. This was the day when the mask slipped off. The day illusion was crushed by truth. Seasoned watchers of Sister Wives had observed Robyn Brown stroll through life for years, with what appeared to be invincible privilege. She was Kody Brown's chosen one. His wife who captured his attention, his loyalty, and most notably, his protection. When the other wives faltered, Robyn flourished. When Christine cried tears of sorrow, when Janelle cried for equality, when Meri sat alone, Robyn seemed protected, privileged, and safe. To many, it wasn't favoritism. It was control, plain and simple, and in that courtroom, the story was finally on the verge of cracking. Once, the judge's gavel came down, its clear ring stilling all whispers and commanding all eyes down the room. Papers rustled, lawyers cleared their throats, but tension in the room was unmistakable. Something momentous was going to be unsealed. And at its center, Robyn sat, her eyes flicking nervously, her hand wrapped tightly around Kody's, as if his mere presence could ward off the tempest. What Robyn didn't know at that point was that this was no longer about image. It wasn't about who cried the most in confessionals or who appeared to be the most committed on television. Courtrooms don't want favoritism. They want facts. And the facts were going to tear apart everything Robyn believed she had wrapped up. The tale of how she came to be this way is one of gradual, deliberate steps. Years went by, and assets began to move. Property deeds, bank accounts, family assets, they all seemed to slide into Robyn's hands. Kody's explanations always sounded sensible, even heroic. It's better this way. It's for the future. It's what makes sense. But behind the words, the trend was unmistakable. Piece by piece, the family's total wealth was fusing into Robyn's possession. Christine was the first to notice it. She came forward, but her fears were dismissed. Janelle witnessed it as well. But any push to call for explanations was met with frustration and gaslighting. Meri, even though traumatized, too often stayed in the background, her voice silenced by years of being belittled. The fans saw it. Viewers argued about it, but within the family, opposition always seemed to fall before the might of Kody's favoritism. If Robyn was favorably situated with Kody, who could argue with her? It was that illusion of invincibility that Robyn brought to the courtroom that day. She felt her seat was secure. She felt Kody's loyalty was sufficient. She felt that the narrative she had been telling herself, the narrative that she was untouchable, would continue. But the walls were already closing. When the proceedings opened, Robyn attempted to keep her cool. She smoothed her hair, pulled herself up straight, even attempted a civil smile. But the tension in her eyes gave her away. She wasn't sure anymore. She had heard rumors of a hidden will. She had seen Christine and Janelle were resolute. She had seen Meri, albeit more subdued, finally emerge into the light of truth. Yet Robyn held on to the idea that emotion and tears would see her through. For years they had, when tensions escalated, her tears mellowed Kody's position. When arguments became nasty, her weakness won his protection. But in that courtroom, with a judge looking down at her, and stacks of legal papers on the table, there was no one to save her. Not even Kody. The silence became thicker as the judge was about to speak. Each second was an eternity. And then, the words. They weren't gentle. They weren't compassionate. They were cutting, factual, and decisive. The judge started discussing the way the assets of the family had been reallocated, how titles had been redistributed, how funds had been reallocated. With each spoken line, another chink was formed in Robyn's carefully constructed edifice. Whispers spread through the courtroom audience. Shock registered on Christine's face, relief on Janelle's, quiet vindication on Meri's. But Robyn, her face paled, her lips quivered, her eyes filled with dread. The fortress she thought she had built was nothing more than sand, and the tide was washing in. By the time the judge's gavel struck again, the reality was undeniable. Robyn's control was broken. That was when it happened. The composure she struggled to maintain fell apart. Her shoulders began to shake. Her breathing grew harder, and tears streamed down her face. Not the rehearsed tears that audiences had witnessed earlier, but raw, uncontrolled sobs of a person who knew her whole world was ending live. She gripped Kody's arm, sobbing through the words, "This isn't fair. This can't be happening." Her sobs rang through the room, bouncing off the walls, compelling all to bear witness to the emotional meltdown of the woman who had appeared indestructible. Kody, bravado aside, sat in shocked silence. His arm wrapped tighter around her, but his eyes spoke volumes. Defeat, helplessness, anger. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't the empire he believed he had won through Robyn. It was finished, and he knew it. And so, the hook of the story, the picture that fans will never be able to get out of their heads, is not the gavel falling, not the documents documenting manipulation, but Robyn Brown herself, weeping in open court. The tears were not just about money. They were about control, power, and identity slipping from her hands. For the first time in her life, Robyn wasn't the favored one. She wasn't the one who held the power. She wasn't the woman who dictated the destiny of the Brown family. She was merely another wife, stripped of authority, laid bare, and confronted with the reality. Her empire had crumbled. This wasn't merely a defeat in the courtroom. This was the breakdown of everything she thought made her invincible. For years, Robyn and Kody had posed as the Brown family's united front. When other marriages were broken, when Christine left, when Janelle held firm, Robyn had the constant and complete attention of Kody. And with complete attention came power. Reports found that most of the family's properties, including homes, money, and even long-term investments, had quietly moved into Robyn's name. Kody said it was for convenience, but the other wives understood what it actually signified. Security for Robyn, insecurity for all the others. Christine, Janelle, and Meri had complained earlier. The fans had picked up on it as well. Why did Robyn's family always take precedence? Why did her kids receive more? Why did her home always look stable while others disintegrated? Secretly, there was resentment building. Christine had reached her breaking point and walked away. Janelle pushed back, insisting on equality. Meri, while often ignored, was starting to realize the manipulation for what it was. So when rumors of a secret will arose, a document that would disclose who really held power over the Brown wealth, the tension blew. The wives knew this was their opportunity, and they took it to court. For Robyn, it was to be easy. She had Kody, the paperwork, the favoritism. She felt the law would safeguard what she felt was hers. But courtrooms are not television. Judges don't yield to favoritism. And the proof was ready to reveal all that which preceded the courtroom drama. The emotional breakdown and the world's witnessing Robyn Brown's empire crumble was years. Years of subtle choices, favoritism, and changes that didn't go unnoticed by all, yet not so by some. To know Robyn's breakdown, you must first know how she arrived there. The reality is that this was not a fall overnight. It was the culmination of years of decisions, of habits, of power drawn incrementally in one place, towards Robyn and away from everyone else. The Browns had always come across as one big family, living the philosophy of plural marriage through mutual love and mutual responsibility, but not beneath the surface. And gradually that imbalance became impossible to ignore. When Robyn initially joined the family, she was hailed as the new beginning, the young, optimistic wife, who revitalized Kody's life with her presence. She was charming, she was empathetic, and she possessed the tolerance to maneuver the intricate dynamic of plural marriage. And with her arrival came something else as well, a distraction of Kody's attention. His love for Robyn was clear, and although some fans argued it was new love energy, and that he deserved it after all he'd been through, the other wives didn't. They felt the pain right away. Christine, who'd been bearing the emotional brunt of the family for so long, noticed Kody's attention wander. Janelle, the pragmatist, saw resources being diverted, and Meri, the original wife, watched her formerly secure position erode as Kody's affections turned elsewhere. Robyn wasn't an other wife. She became the wife, and with that came power. Initially subtle, but increasingly more powerful each year. It had nothing to do with time or love, everything to do with money. The audience began to pick up on the disparity. Robyn's house was bigger, cozier, and apparently more economically subsidized than the others. While Janelle and Christine grappled with housing arrangements, Robyn's home always seemed to take priority. When holidays, vacations, or even the manner in which Kody spoke of his wives were concerned, Robyn's name was always raised higher. On television, Kody once confessed he felt bad for ignoring his other wives, but guilt did not prevent him from continuing to favor her. Behind closed doors, this preferential treatment equated to something much larger: fiscal control. Documents subsequently unearthed what the wives had long suspected. Kody had started transferring assets into Robyn's name. Land deeds, investments, and bank accounts were progressively rerouted. His rationale: convenience, ease, protection. But for Christine, Janelle, and Meri, it was betrayal. The wives had constructed their lives together. All the wives had sacrificed. All the wives had given years of work, children, and devotion to this family. But when the time to secure the future came, only one wife profited. Christine was among the first of the group to speak out. She questioned fairness, lack of transparency. She felt that her children's future was being cast aside, as Robyn's children were provided for. Her frustrations became louder until she left the marriage entirely. Janelle did things differently. Practical and reliable, she insisted on precision. She sought to know where the money was spent, why they weren't making decisions together. But whenever she expressed her concerns, she was greeted by resistance, defensiveness, and gaslighting. And Meri, she stayed in the background, quietly suffering the abandonment. Once Kody's legal wife, now she found herself relegated, as Robyn occupied the very spot she had previously held. As the years went by, the chasm grew. What had begun as a family of equals became a hierarchy. At the apex, Robyn and Kody, below, three wives shoved further and further back. Fans caught on as well. On social media, arguments erupted. Fans highlighted how frequently Robyn cried on television, how quickly Kody defended her, and how his approach was different towards the other wives. To most, it appeared to be manipulation, a calculated deployment of vulnerability in order to keep control. Every tear, every plea, every emotional breakdown served to strengthen Kody's allegiance to her, and his allegiance to the other wives withered in return. But what Robyn and Kody didn't know was that each decision, each shift, was leaving a path, and that path would ultimately lead directly to a courtroom. The breaking point came when rumors of a will started circulating, a paper that, if confirmed as true, would show the last nail in the coffin of fairness in the family. The will supposedly established how the Brown fortune would be distributed, or rather, how it wouldn't. The greater portion of assets, properties, and wealth, according to those who had witnessed it, went to Robyn and her children. For Christine and Janelle, it was the ultimate betrayal. Years of deprivation, years of having less, years of being instructed to trust the process, only to learn that the process was aimed at leaving them with zero. Meri, while usually quiet, could not remain oblivious to what she had sensed all along. She had been replaced, not only emotionally but legally. This will was no longer a personal issue. It was the focal point of a courtroom struggle. And that courtroom struggle paved the way for Robyn's demise. Asked before all the evidence piled up, Robyn strolled into court confidently. She had Kody by her side. After all, she had documents, legal seals, precedents stretching decades. To her, this was routine. Another chance to make sure she got what she already felt entitled to. She walked as if she was beyond reach. Her tears had always been sufficient. Her weakness had always prevailed. Why should this day be otherwise? But Robyn's biggest misstep was that a courtroom doesn't curve to cater to favoritism. A judge doesn't respond to emotional manipulation. The law only recognizes the truth. And the truth was on the verge of removing everything she had established. By the time the case was at its height, the rift in the family was irreparable. Christine had her freedom. Janelle was adamant to seek justice. Meri, though injured, was now standing up at last. And Robyn, she was built upon a foundation of sand, thinking it to be stone. The years of domination, special treatment, and silent realignments of power had constructed an empire. But empires constructed from injustice always crumble. And Robyn's empire was about to crumble in the most public, humiliating manner imaginable. The courtroom was filled with quietness, the sort of quietness that precedes a tempest. The judge started reading the documents. And at once, the atmosphere changed. The will, long concealed, was finally revealed. It indicated not merely the passing of property, but also explicit proof that Kody had unfairly distributed assets and wealth into Robyn's hands. What was to have been the legacy of the family had brick by brick become Robyn's domain. Gasps filled the room. Christine clenched her jaw. Janelle exchanged a quick glance of relief. And Meri's eyes widened as if every suspicion she'd ever had was suddenly validated. Then came the bombshell. The judge declared those transfers invalid. The court would freeze Robyn's control over the assets. The family fortune, the properties, the financial accounts, all of it, stripped from her immediate power. Robyn's face paled. Kody's bravado collapsed. He had entered confident, nearly smug, and now sat frozen, regarding the papers that dismantled years of preparation. The courtroom drama reached its climax as the decision was finalized. Not only did Robyn lose her hold, but the power dynamics shifted completely. The assets would be redivided equitably between the wives, and financial manipulation investigations would continue. To Robyn, this was not a loss. It was humiliation. The woman who had been untouchable was now revealed. Trapped and helpless. The courtroom was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was that creepy kind of quiet that precedes something life-altering. A quiet heavy with tension, fear, and expectation. Every eye was on the judge. Every breath was a countdown. Kody Brown sat rigidly, jaw clenched, eyes squinting at the pile of papers sitting on the judge's desk. He had entered the room a few minutes before with his typical assurance. Chest puffed out, chin held high. A man who believed the system would once again flex in his direction. Now, however, that assurance was eroding, piece by piece. Next to him, Robyn fidgeted uncomfortably. Her fingers shook as she gripped Kody's arm. She managed a weak smile, but the fear in her eyes told a different story. Across from her, in the aisle, Christine sat rigid, serene yet strained, her fingers crossed tightly, as if she were praying silently for justice. Janelle leaned forward in her seat, eyes fixed on the judge, while Meri had a still face but racing heart. The moment that everyone was waiting for had finally come. The judge adjusted his glasses, took up the first paper, and started to read. His voice remained calm, but his words sliced through the air like a knife. This court has received evidence on the transfer of assets in the Brown family, including property deeds, financial accounts, and estate planning documents. The room shifted. Kody stiffened. Robyn's clutch hardened. Christine's mouth compressed. The judge went on. It is evident from these papers that a great deal of the family's finances were gathered into the control of Robyn Brown over a period of many years. A gasp moved through the courtroom. Christine gave Janelle a swift look, relief flashing across her features. Janelle nodded, her suspicions at last confirmed. Meri breathed out, her eyes brimming with the vindication she had secretly yearned for. Robyn went white. She shook her head and whispered to herself, "No, no, that's not right." Kody's fists were balled, his posture tense. The judge's words landed harder than anyone had anticipated. These transfers, however, are found to be invalid. The evidence reveals that these assets were transferred without the knowledge, agreement, or equitable consent of the other parties. Thus, they will be frozen effective immediately, pending redistribution. It was as if a lightning bolt had hit the room. Christine gasped, hand over her mouth. Janelle let her shoulders sag with relief. Even Meri, who was not one for displays of emotion, breathed softly. Oh my God. But the most telling moment belonged to Robyn. Her body went rigid, then sagged. Her eyes welled up at once. She shook her head in denial, whispering, "That's impossible. That's not fair. That's not true." Kody leaned into her, hissing harshly, "Be calm. Don't let them witness you crack." But even he could not conceal the sweat gathering at his temples, the jerk of his jaw, the fact that all that he had worked for was eroding. The judge was not done. He removed a second piece of paper, this one more incriminating than the first. Even this court has examined the provisions of the will that was given. In these documents, it is mentioned that upon Kody Brown's death, most of his assets, properties, and money would be left solely to Robyn Brown and her children. The room exploded in murmurs, gasps, even stifled wails of shock. Christine appeared as though she had been hit, but not with shock, with the gravity of confirmation. She had long suspected this reality, and now the world was aware. Janelle grumbled under her breath, "Unbelievable, all for her." Meri sat motionless, her shaking hands, but on her face a mask of unreadability. For so long she had felt discarded, irrelevant. And now, here it was in black and white, evidence that she had been cut out not only emotionally, but also financially. Robyn's tears came freely now. She gripped Kody's arm tightly, her sobs now beginning to rock her body. "They can't take this from me," she wept softly, but the courtroom microphones captured every word. The judge held up his hand, quieting the buzz. His voice stayed steady, unfazed by the sea of emotion filling the room. "This will is now considered unjust, and its stipulations will not be enforced in their present state. The property and estate under consideration will be redistributed to all the legitimate claimants." The words rang out like thunder. Robyn crumbled. The sobs became louder, out of control. She hid her face in her hands, shuddering uncontrollably as tears fell onto the table. The woman who had always held it together, always relied on tears as a defense, now seemed shattered, undone. Kody attempted to put his hand on her back, but even that comfort sounded empty. He sat directly in front of her, his face a mask of rage, humiliation, and incredulity. Christine rested back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had waited so long for this day, and even though it didn't take away the pain of the past, it justified every sentence she had uttered. Janelle closed her eyes tightly, saying a silent prayer of thanksgiving. She wasn't rejoicing at Robyn's suffering, but she was rejoicing at justice. And what about Meri? She sat quietly, tears welling in her eyes. For once she wasn't invisible. For once the truth was known. The judge's gavel came down again, marking the end of the decision. But for the Browns, it was more than the end of a hearing. It was the end of an empire. The years of preferential treatment, the clandestine transfers, the manipulative tears, the imbalance that had sundered the family, all was revealed now, and there was no turning back. The Brown family legacy, once thought to be a reflection of unity and faith, now became a reflection of betrayal and greed. And at the core of that collapse sat Robyn, tears flowing from her eyes, the picture of defeat. As individuals started to stand from their seats, the charge remained. Christine and Janelle shared a look that said it all. Relief, justice, closure. Meri remained seated for an extra moment, drinking in the fact that what had just been affirmed was real. Robyn couldn't budge. Her sobs had become silent wails, her shoulders shuddering out of control. Kody whispered angrily into her ear, but his words drowned in the confusion around them. For years Robyn had been the unbreachable one, the spoiled one, the safe one. But in that courtroom, she was exposed. The decision didn't only strip her of her wealth, It stripped her of the illusion that had protected her. After everything, the judge's decision wasn't about money or possessions. It was about justice. It was about years and years of inequality rectified, years and years of favoritism challenged, years and years of truth finally brought to light. For Christine, Janelle, and Meri, it was vindication. For Kody, it was shame. For Robyn, it was destruction. The surprise twist wasn't the verdict itself. It was seeing Robyn, the wife who had always appeared above reproach, shatter into pieces, naked in front of the world. And as the courtroom cleared, one fact remained in each head: the Brown family would never be the same. And then it did. Robyn broke. Tears ran down her cheeks as she grabbed at Kody's arm, whispering, "This can't be happening. This isn't fair." Her sobs rang through the chamber, filling the room with raw despair. Kody attempted to soothe her, but even his expression gave away the truth. He had lost. His empire constructed on the premise of Robyn's safety was falling apart. The wives he marginalized now stood victorious, and his chosen wife crumpled at his side. Christine could not conceal her satisfaction. Janelle, ever more subdued, permitted herself a sigh of relief. Meri, long martyred in silence, observed quietly vindicated. For Robyn, the collapse wasn't simply financial. It was an issue of identity. She was always the stable one, the one Kody preferred, the one who was set to inherit it all. Now, she was exposed, helpless, and emotionally devastated before the whole world, her co-wives, husband, and the rest of the world. The sound of the gavel coming down had not even faded when the force of the ruling descended on Robyn Brown like a tsunami. What the judge had stripped from her was not money, land, or titles alone. It was her identity, her protection, the security she thought would shield her and her children for a lifetime. For years, Robyn had been the emotional center of Kody's universe, the wife who could snap him out of rage, the woman whose tears melted his heart. But in that courtroom, those tears were powerless. The words of the judge were final, the choice irreversible. And so, publicly for the first time, Robyn didn't merely cry. She fainted. As the courtroom cleared, Christine and Janelle looked at each other with relief. Meri was stuck in thought, and Kody stormed out of the exit, jaw clenched, fists balled. But Robyn didn't budge. She was slumped in her chair, her hands over her face. Her sobs were no longer soft and composed. They were raw, loud, and out of control. This wasn't the tearful crying audiences had witnessed on tape, the kind that elicits sympathy. This was breakdown. Panic. Fear, she groaned through her tears. Everything's gone. Everything. How will I protect them? For once there was no empathy in the room. No one came running to console her. The wives who had years of seeing her bask in favoritism, who had suffered neglect while she flourished, sat quietly. They weren't mean, but they weren't blind either. The cracks in Robyn's carefully built persona were wide open for the world to see. Kody eventually returned, pacing angrily before sitting next to her. Instead of consoling her, he hissed under his breath, "Stop crying, Robyn. You're making this worse. We'll fight this. We'll appeal." But his words were hollow. His usual confidence, the bravado he carried like armor, was gone. Even he knew they were cornered. Robyn regarded him with tearful eyes, seeking the reassurance she had always received from him. But there was only anger, not at her, but at the reality they were unable to avoid. She whispered, "You promised me, you said everything would be safe." Kody said nothing. He couldn't. Across the room, Christine's lips creased into the slightest smile, not cruelly, but with relief. For years she had been gaslighted, informed that her worry was unnecessary, that Robyn wasn't special, that her sacrifices counted for nothing. Now, the reality had been exposed before a judge. Janelle, always practical, leaned over Christine and said quietly, "This is what justice looks like." Even Meri, who had long kept quiet and meek, couldn't help the glimmer of confirmation that swept her face. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, Robyn wasn't untouchable. None of them openly gloated, but in their hearts they knew this moment would alter everything. As the reality hit her harder, Robyn's wails became more deafening. She pressed her chest, swaying back and forth on her seat. "This isn't fair. I did all the right things. I held the family together. I played by the rules. Why are they doing this to me? She cried. Her words rang out across the almost deserted courtroom, but they were meaningless to those who had lived with her. Christine shook her head softly, whispering, "You didn't hold us together, Robyn. You destroyed us." Although she never spoke the words, her eyes said it all. For the first time, Robyn had to confront not only the court's ruling, but the opinion of those who had once been members of her family. Outside the courthouse, cameras clicked, and microphones were thrust in her face. News organizations had held their breath for this decision, and Robyn's emotional breakdown became the headline photo. Grabbing Kody's arm, her cheeks flushed and smeared with tears, she attempted to hide herself from the madness. But it was too late. Snippets of her crying flashed on social media in minutes. Hashtags went viral. #Robyn falls. #justice for Christine. #Kody exposed. Fans who had long accused her of favoritism now viewed her public breakdown as vindication. The sympathy she once elicited was lost. Public opinion shifted. Later that night, as the Browns returned to their respective homes, the backlash persisted. Christine took in her children, telling them justice had at last been served, but with a tranquility that indicated she was no longer concerned with vengeance. It was time to move on. Janelle, the planner, sat down with her kids, talking about how this verdict could set them free to pursue their own destinies without worry of being cut out. Meri slipped away quietly, but for the first time in years, she was no longer the neglected wife. The truth had brought her closure she didn't realize she needed. And then Kody and Robyn. Their house, where once superiority hung in the air, was thick with silence. Robyn sobbed into her pillow, her voice shattering as she cried, "What did I do wrong?" But deep down, she knew the answer. This breakdown wasn't just emotional, it was symbolic. For over a decade, Robyn had been the center of Kody's world, the wife who seemed untouchable. But the ruling stripped away more than finances. It stripped away her aura of invincibility. The family now saw her for what she was: vulnerable, fallible, and no longer protected by Kody's favoritism. Christine, Janelle, and Meri had entered court feeling helpless. They exited with a different sort of strength. And that reallocation of power was the start of a new chapter, one in which Robyn no longer dominated at the top. In the ensuing days, Robyn's meltdown became a hallmark image of the whole case. Her crying was shown over and over, dissected, criticized, even ridiculed. But behind the headlines, the emotional damage remained in her house. She isolated herself from the public, closing doors, dodging cameras. Her children witnessed her break apart, bewildered and terrified, and Kody became angrier and more withdrawn. The family that she believed she had established through paperwork was torn apart beyond its repair. The empire that she expected to last an eternity was lost. And the woman who had thought that her tears could mend anything was left with the cold reality. Some wounds can't be healed through crying. Robyn. Quote's meltdown was not about losing influence or assets. It was about losing control, losing the carefully crafted image, and confronting the fact that favoritism cannot hold forever. For years she had been protected by Kody's love, but in the harsh reality of a courtroom, all of that didn't count. The law only recognized the reality. And within that reality, Robyn was stripped naked. Not the beloved wife, not the untouchable wife, but merely another individual subjected to the repercussions of actions taken. Her breakdown will be recalled not as a sympathetic moment, but as the ultimate conclusive evidence that the pendulum had swung. The empire was down, and Robyn was with it. The ruling was the end of an era. The Brown family would never be the same. Robyn's breakdown represented something greater than loss of money. It was the defeat of years of manipulation and unfair favoritism. Christine emerged with greater confidence, aware that her battle had finally been worthwhile. Janelle achieved the justice she had insisted upon all along. Even Meri, the lesser-known wife, stood taller with the advent of justice. For Kody and Robyn, the loss left them alone. Their relationship, previously constructed on favoritism and domination, now was saddled with shame and anger. Fans wondered if their relationship could make it through the aftermath. Narrator: within that courtroom, the empire Kody attempted to construct around Robyn didn't merely collapse, it was dismantled piece by piece. And Robyn's breakdown demonstrated to the world that no person, no matter how omnipotent they might appear, is immune to their own undoing. The sister wives saga has forever been one of love, strife, and family. But this bombshell in the courtroom exposed the uglier truth: betrayal, greed, and the heartbreaking price of domination. And so the Brown family continued on, forever altered. Robyn's tears a reminder always that in the end, no secret is ever kept for long. The courtroom doors had swung shut, the gavel had fallen, the decision was made. But for the Brown family, the saga wasn't over with the verdict. In a way, it was just beginning. As the news burst through the web, as the fans analyzed each instant of Robyn's sobbing breakdown, the family was confronted with a new reality. One without the veil of unity. One in which the reality of favoritism, betrayal, and secret wills was no longer confidential. The dust was beginning to settle, but beneath it was a shattered family, one that would never be the same again. For Christine, the verdict wasn't just vindication. It was freedom. She had left Kody years ago, worn down by his abandonment and his preferential treatment of Robyn, but leaving hadn't healed the wounds. The court win provided her with something she hadn't experienced in a while: justice. For years she'd yelled in the wind, declaring the favoritism was killing off the family. Now a judge had told her that she'd been correct all along. With the decision, Christine felt stronger again. Her children, who had also suffered from being treated as less than, finally realized that their efforts hadn't been wasted. They weren't written out of the future of their family. Christine's course of action was evident. She would continue to establish her own life, free from Kody and Robyn's shadow, but now with the knowledge that the family finances would no longer be monopolized by one individual. For Christine, the aftermath was healing, and healing out loud. Janelle, ever the pragmatist, viewed the ruling differently. It wasn't about emotional validation for her, although she felt a huge relief. It was about safety. For years, Janelle had been the workhorse of the family. She had managed finances, raised children, and made countless sacrifices, all while receiving little recognition. When the will revealed Robyn's dominance, Janelle's fears were confirmed. Her years of effort would have ended with nothing. Now that was different. With the assets frozen and ready for redistribution, Janelle finally could make something of herself for her children. The court decision allowed her the freedom to be in control of her own financial destiny without being held hostage to Kody's favoritism. Janelle came out of the aftermath not a victim, but a strategist. She was already anticipating property, investments, and how to finally leave a legacy for her family line. Her takeaway was clear: no more blind trust. From now on, Janelle was the architect of her future. For Meri, the aftermath was more complicated. She had always been the quiet one, the overlooked wife, the woman who stayed even when her heart was breaking. She endured years of being sidelined, stripped of her role as the legal wife, and eventually discarded emotionally. Listening to the will read aloud in court was a stab in the chest. It was the confirmation of something she had always suspected. She had been removed from Kody's life, not only emotionally but economically as well. She was never supposed to count in the end. And yet, strangely, the ruling brought her peace. For years she wondered if she had been dreaming the favoritism, if she was going insane for feeling pushed aside. Now the world had witnessed it as well. The courtroom had confirmed her sorrow. The aftermath for Meri was closure. She could finally stop waiting for Kody to love her once more. She could finally stop blaming herself. In her unobtrusive manner, Meri had been set free. Kody Brown exited the courtroom a shadow of the man he once introduced himself to the world as. For years he had strutted about with the swagger of a patriarch, believing he was master of his many wives and children and their joint fate. But the judge's decision took away that power. His bias had been uncovered, his rulings negated, and his carefully worded will torn apart. For Kody, the consequences were humiliation. His authority had fallen apart, his financial security shaken, and his family torn apart beyond salvage. Worse yet, his status as the leader of a plural marriage was irrelevant. Christine had abandoned him. Janelle was forging her own course. Meri had tuned out emotionally, and Robyn, his previous unshakable supporter, was submerged in tragedy and despair. The emperor retained his crown, but his throne was lost. And then there was Robyn. Her collapse in the courtroom wasn't an outburst of feeling. It was the disintegration of all she had constructed. For years she was the favored wife, the stable one, the woman who felt she had survived the rest. But the verdict left her vulnerable. The fortune she had considered hers by right was lost. The will that had assured her supremacy was revoked, and the family that she had thought she had built up around her was broken, with the other wives now standing taller than ever. The consequences for Robyn were devastation. She withdrew into silence, ashamed of the viral photos of her breakdown. The public ridiculed her tears, and the sympathy that once surrounded her had converted to ridicule. Even worse, she no longer enjoyed the blind devotion of Kody to protect her. He was too busy tending to his own pride to console her. Robyn had always depended on her tears to maintain power, but now her tears represented weakness. And in the cold light of public scrutiny, she was no longer the untouchable favorite. She was the toppled queen. Although the courtroom drama revolved around the parents, the Brown children also suffered the repercussions. Christine's children felt vindicated, finally free from the fear of being erased. They rallied around their mother, proud of her courage to leave when she did. Janelle's children felt hopeful, finally seeing a future where their mother's sacrifices would be honored. Meri's child Leon saw the validation of their mother's years of pain, giving them closure too. But Robyn's children suffered the most. They saw their mother lose her grip, bewildered by the aggression leveled against her. For them the aftermath was uncertainty, a life that held no longer any promise of security. The Brown family had previously been presented as an emblem of plural marriage, unity in diversity, love through adversity. TLC constructed seasons of television around that image. But the wake of the courtroom decision brought out the truth. Favoritism had ended the dream. Far from one unified family, the Browns were now disconnected branches, each following their own way. The decision had taken away not only money, but also the illusion that had united them. The legacy Kody once boasted about leaving behind now rested in shambles, and the world was holding its breath. So what's next for the Browns? For Christine, freedom, healing, and maybe even love outside of the family that trapped her. For Janelle, stability, independence, and the opportunity to finally create something lasting for her children. For Meri, closure, quiet strength, and the hope of redefining her life beyond Kody's shadow. For Kody, a questionable future, his power lost, his family broken, his reputation in tatters. And for Robyn, a long path of recovery, both personally and in the public eye. She will always be remembered for breaking down, for crying, for collapsing in the courtroom. If she recovers from it or slips away into silence, only time will tell. The aftermath of the courtroom decision was more than mere redistribution of funds. It was the closing of an era. The reality had finally been laid bare, the favoritism unmasked, and the wives long silenced finally had their say. To the fans who had been watching for decades, it was shocking, dramatic, and heartbreaking. But to the Browns, it was life-changing. The empire was collapsed, the family was broken, and the future, which had been dictated by Kody and Robyn, now rested with the women who had survived and thrived. The courtroom decision didn't merely alter their finances. It altered everything.